Well, hey there, everyone. It's Mrs. Estero here with another First Chapter Friday. The book that I selected today is something that I thought would be great for back to school season, and it's by an author that I really love, Gordan Korman, and it is The Sixth Grade Nickname Game. I hope that you're going to love this one. I'm going to read the first chapter to you, but first I would like to just tell you a little bit about the book. So I'm going to read you the inside of the book jacket. Almost everybody in Old Orchard Public School, which the acronym is OOPS for that, Old Orchard Public School, OOPS, has had the dubious honor of receiving a nickname from best friends Jeff and Wiley. They've dubbed their own underachieving class the Dim Bulbs. Their pop-eyed principal is better known as Deer in Headlights, and their enormous football coach turned teacher is now Mr. Huge. It's only when a spunky, red-haired environmentalist named Cassandra enters their lives that the boys begin to doubt themselves. No name seems to say it all. On top of that, some of the nicknames are backfiring, and their new teacher is in danger of losing his job. Will the nicknamers be able to get it together before it's too late? So we're going to dive into the first chapter, but first I want to make sure that you have your First Chapter Friday freebie, which is available for download in the comments section of this YouTube video. These are great for printing and taping into your reader's notebook and keeping track of all of your favorite books, so when it comes time to choose a new book, you'll have somewhere to start. Okay, so let's dive into the sixth grade nickname game. And just to point out some of these characters here, we have Snoopy, Mr. Huge, Deer in Headlights, Crusty Bones, 3 question marks, and finally, Skunk. Okay. So chapter 1 is called The Nicknamers. The substitute teacher must have been 6 feet 5 and solid as an oak tree. He shrugged his massive shoulders out of his warm-up jacket, revealing a barrel chest and giant muscles rippling under his t-shirt. In the back row, Wiley Adamson opened his notebook to a clean page and wrote, "King Kong?" At the next desk, Jeff Greenbaum examined the paper critically. His brown eyes narrowed, as they always did when he was deep in thought. Deliberately, he reached out his pencil and drew a line through the nickname. Below it, he printed, "The Incredible Hulk." Wiley flashed a grudging grin of admiration, but he crossed that one out too and added, "Tiny?" This brought a snicker from Jeff, which he swallowed when the new teacher began to speak. "I guess I don't look very much like Mrs. Reagan," he chuckled in a deep voice. This was true. The regular teacher stood 4 feet 9 and was wispy and white-haired. She had just retired to Florida. "I'll be taking over this class until a permanent replacement is found." An uncomfortable murmur passed through the room. It wasn't so bad losing Mrs. Reagan, and having a sub was usually a license to goof off. But this sub was obviously no pushover. He looked like the Terminator. Through the speech, Wiley and Jeff continued to trade ideas. Hercules? Mr. Enormous? But nothing seemed just right. And if there was anything the two nicknamers of 6B knew for certain, it was that a true nickname had to fit perfectly. Now, some of you might recognize me as the assistant coach of the football team over at the high school, the big teacher was saying. I never expected to wind up in 6th grade, but, you know, with budget cuts. Musclehead? Conan the Gargantuan? He picked up the chalk and wrote his name on the board. I'm Mr. Hughes. Look at how it's spelled. Hughes. Wiley and Jeff exchanged a look of pure delight. Peter Widman was the leader hitter of the softball game at recess. He already had a nickname, courtesy of Wiley and Jeff. Because of the thin blonde streak in his jet black hair, he was known affectionately as Skunk. He tapped his bat on the home plate and assumed his stance. Hey, Skunk, said Wiley from his catcher's crouch. What do you think of Mr. Huge? And they're spelling it, obviously, huge instead of Hughes, right? Peter stared at him for a moment and then threw back his head and laughed. Mr. Huge, he cackled. I get it. That's funny. What's the holdup? Called Jeff from the pitcher's mound. We're talking about Mr. Huge, roared Peter. Jeff pretended not to understand. You mean Mr. Hughes? He yelled back, with a wink aimed at Wiley. No, Mr. Huge. Peter got a hit. Soon he and the first baseman were laughing over the new nickname. When Peter stole second and then third, the entire infield was brought in on the joke. By the end of the inning, the word was out. Raymond Vaughn, the shortstop, had even taught himself how to burp Mr. Huge at top volume. Most of what Raymond said was communicated by a series of belches. This talent had earned him the nickname Gas Bag. Mr. Huge spread through the softball game like a case of measles. Every few seconds, a burst of laughter or shout of approval sprang up as the new nickname was passed from mouth to mouth. Mr. Oh, I get it, because he's so big. And his name, Hughes, Huge. Why didn't I think of that? Wiley looked at his watch. 11 minutes and 45 seconds. That's got to be our fastest time ever, Jeff said proudly. Then the bush in front of them sneezed. Charles Rossi sprang up out of the scratchy branches. I'm on to you guys, he raged. Don't think I can't see what you're up to. You just got everybody to call the new teacher Mr. Huge. Wiley shrugged. The guy's enormous, and his name is Hughes. It was only a matter of time before somebody came up with it. But you did. You do it all the time, Charles accused them. I'll bet it's like a game to you jerks. Wiley snorted in disgust. Ignore him, he advised Jeff. You know what this is about, and it has nothing to do with Mr. Huge. Charles just doesn't like being called Snoopy. Charles Rossi's face turned beet red. If looks could kill, Wiley and Jeff would have fallen down dead right on the spot. Snoopy is a stupid nickname, a mean nickname, a dog's nickname. Face it, Jeff said reasonably. You know why everybody calls you Snoopy, because you spend more time minding other people's business than your own. Wiley nodded in agreement. Where did we find you just now? In the bushes, snooping. I was not, Charles raged. I was tying my shoe. You're the ones who thought up Snoopy, and you blabbed it all over the world, exactly like you just did with Mr. Huge. Jeff rolled his eyes. If Snoopy was a bad nickname, nobody else would even bother repeating it. You're Snoopy because you're the biggest snoop in the school. It's a well-known fact that a nickname will never stick if it's not the right one. Baloney, Charles accused. You can make any nickname stick if you say it often enough. No way, said Jeff. We'll prove it, Wiley added. Pick a kid, any kid, and we'll give him a nickname that's totally, completely, absolutely wrong. You'll see, it won't stick. Charles' eyes narrowed. What's in it for me if I'm right? Wiley shrugged. What have you got in mind? I want a new nickname, Charles said instantly. A good nickname. A person's nickname. It's a deal, agreed Jeff. With a sweep of an arm, he indicated the playground. All we need now is a guinea pig for our experiment. The three looked around. Most of the softball players already had nicknames. Kelly Warnover was known as Warmed Over Leftovers. Christy Jones was Crusty Bones. Gordon Woo's monster appetite had earned him the title Smorgasbord. Identical twin brothers Dinky and Stan were dubbed Stinky and Dan. And of course, Gasbag and Skunk. I've got it, said Charles. Him. Wiley and Jeff followed the direction of his pointing finger. There stood Mike Smith, a tall blond boy from 6A. Mike was in the midst of a spirited game of dodgeball, but he definitely wasn't participating. He wasn't even watching. Actually, he wasn't doing anything. Wiley and Jeff groaned in unison. They knew it wasn't going to be easy to come up with a nickname, good or bad, for Mike Smith. Mike was simply the blandest student in the history of Old Orchard Public School, called Oops, thanks to the two nicknamers. He was neither happy nor unhappy. He didn't really have any friends, but no one was his enemy. What was he like? What was his favorite food? Did he watch TV? Was he a sports fan? Computer nerd? Musician? Martian? Nobody really knew. Come on, Snoopy, Wiley wheedled. Pick somebody else. That guy is so nothing. If we can't figure out what he is, how can we nickname what he isn't? Charles folded his arms in front of him. He's my choice. Jeff threw his hands in the air. What are you supposed to call a blob like that? Iceman? That's it, crowed Wiley. Iceman. He turned to Charles. If that name sticks, I'll eat your backpack. The bell rang to signal the end of recess. Wiley, Jeff, and Charles joined the parade to the door. Charles elbowed Jeff in the ribs. I don't hear anything. Jeff frowned. What are you listening for? Bird calls? Charles gestured toward Mike Smith. You have to call him Iceman. You know, spread it around, just like you did with Mr. Huge. Jeff looked helpless. I feel so stupid. He's about as cool as a loaf of bread. Why don't you do it, Snoopy? It only works when it's you. Oh, all right, sighed Wiley. He waved at Mike and piped up. Hey, Iceman! The tall boy from 6A didn't even look up. They were obviously talking to somebody else. Wiley nudged Jeff. This is one bet we can't lose. And that is the end of Chapter 1 of the 6th grade nickname game. I hope that if you're interested in it, you'll check it out at your local public library. Until then, happy reading, and I will see you next Friday.